Hello everyone and welcome to the New Normal Speaker Series. My name is Gjoko Muratovski and I'm the director of the Ullman School of Design. My special guest today is Karim Rashid. Karim is a designer that doesn't need much introduction. He is one of the most iconic and recognizable designers of our times.
Thank you very much.
I remember clearly when you emerged on the global design scene in the mid-1990s. This was a time when so many things were changing on so many levels, and you had this uncanny ability to capture the spirit of the time with your designs. You were very attuned to the zeitgeist that signaled the transition to the new millennium. In your work, you factored in new materials, new software, new technologies, and new social experiences. And you were this very exciting new design voice that was determined to change the world. Now, as we are going through even more radical changes, I would like to hear how you see the field of design evolving. So my question is, what does the future of design look like for Karim Rashid?
Well, okay, let me go back a little bit and explain a few things. I think that when I went into design university, when I studied, design was very much of a kind of Teutonic Bauhausian education. Bauhaus has still prevailed all the way up from the 1918. Probably that education and that methodology was moving around the world easily until the late 70s, 80s. And I had German and Dutch professors, so which was interesting because on the Dutch side, there was a few of my professors were part of the De Stijl movement, and the Germans were all very much, again, of this kind of, let's say, very pragmatic notion that design is all about function and working well, et cetera. And at the same time, at that time, there was this sort of new avant-garde taking place, and this was started in the late 60s, a kind of radical design, as with Jean Lyotard said, the postmodern condition started in like late 60s. And by the 70s and early 80s, Italy was kind of at this forefront of making a movement that was really questioning modernism, and it was reacting to all the issues of modernism, i.e. modernism was negligent of decoration. They were bringing decoration into design. Modernism was about doing something that, let's say, had longevity. They were bringing this notion of doing disposable design, inexpensive democratic things, using plastic laminates. They were bringing in color. Modernism was completely against color. In fact, to the point where when I was in university too, my faculty for 5 years, they didn't allow us to ever use color in any of our models or our work. So it was all gray, black, and white. I remember making a clock radio, and it was like brawn, it was this sensibility. And I was inside me, all I wanted to do was express myself with color, actually, but I couldn't for all those years, which was good. I had a good education because it was very pragmatic, and I was very kind of artistic and creative. So it was a good kind of, how can I say, rigor for me. Anyway, moving to that, back in the 80s, there was this notion of like semantics, of language that was to make a product speak about how it works, but speak about it also in a kind of poetic way. So, for example, Cranbrook School, which, by the way, was very proactive, was doing some beautiful things with Michael McCoy. There was these ideas of like, let's say, a volume button on a stereo that instead of having just a dial, you would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but the buttons were getting bigger and bigger and bigger because obviously 10 is the loudest volume, 9, 8, 7. So there's this kind of connection, this notion of doing a kind of better, what we call today, user experience and user interface. But it was more poetic, let's say. And also the kind of hierarchies that when you look at an object or something, you have to understand how you interact with it firstly, then secondary, then tertiary, etc. And at the same time, there was a movement in the late 70s of making objects completely sustainable and have their life cycle considered. So as a designer, when you design something, you design an electric kettle, it would break up into 4 parts, and the polymer would go one way, and the aluminum would go the other way, etc. So these were the like layers of education of time passing through. what I always, in all that morass of complexity of design, I always had this desire to do something original. Now, and I don't know really where it came from. It might have come from my father. He's an artist and a set designer for television. He was quite a very creative man. He was always kind of on the pulse of living in the moment, let's say. And I realized that for me to do something original meant that I had to understand the social zeitgeist of the time. I had to understand the materials of the time, technologies of the time, as you mentioned earlier, softwares of the time. So I had this like desire to pull in those factions, all that criteria in order to do something original. And that's why, let's say back in the 90s, when you mentioned the things that I was doing, was all I was interested in was the moment in which humanity exists, a kind of living in the now. Now, I continued that way, and I even continue that way until today. I'm not a very nostalgic person, and I don't really believe very much in looking back, and I don't believe in looking into history. And the reason I don't believe in looking into history is because when we look into history, we're not really designing anymore. Even though we say, oh, there's something to learn from it. Yes, there's no question there's something to learn, but there's a difference between learning and looking at it as so-called inspiration. And the term inspiration is a dangerous one, because what we do is, if it's visual, I'm not really sure you're being inspired. You know, if you look back at imagery from the 1960s, and then you make something kind of similar, it's more appropriation or derivation than it is inspiration. You know, to be inspired is really to be inspired by, you know, reading a good book or hearing good music or watching the way the person across the street in their window lives day to day, you know, and how they maneuver around their apartment. That's being inspired. Being inspired is understanding how the mind works, how the human mind operates. Why do we have likes, dislikes? Why do we behave in certain ways, etc.? So anyway, going back to all that, just quickly to answer your point, is that I was obsessed with this notion of doing something original. And in order to do something original, I have to have my tentacles out. I have to really feel the moment in which I live, and I have to embrace it. And I lastly have to be incredibly objective and open-minded. I can't have personal taste, likes, dislikes, all these things. I have to just be very, as if I come from another planet. And by the way, I've been telling myself that for 25, 30 years. Always just act like you come from a different place, another planet, and watch humanity. Because humanity is like funny, strange, it's peculiar, it's maudlin, it's I don't know how, it's kitsch sometimes, it's, you know, it's loaded. And so you step back and look at the issue, look at the problem, look at what you're working on. And there's so much opportunity to be inspired by, and in turn, when you bring those things in, you yourself will do something original. So now, 2020, as you said, you know, we're going through a very, I think, in design especially, I think we're going through a very major change. There's going to be a massive schism here. First schism was the introduction of the digital age, because the digital age is a dematerialization. It's not about doing physical stuff. It's not about designing. It's not about physical clothes or objects or architecture or anything, really. Digital age is immaterial, right? So that was the first big shift. And the second big shift now is the digital age is shown as how we somehow, like we are now, globally operating with almost no physicality whatsoever. My physicality with you right now basically is my laptop, that's it. And my other physicality is, as always, because I need a really good cup of coffee, is my coffee mug in my hand or my eyeglasses on my head. But in general, or my elbows are on the table. But in general, all our human experiences, let's say, our evolution, our progress, our innovation is all happening digitally at this moment in time. So this is a massive one. And then, of course, I don't want to talk about this too much because this is an issue that is, how can I say, talking about it, I think, is not a positive way of moving forward. But the virus has also then impacted and exponentially grown this kind of virtual human realm.
Well, you know, it's like what you just mentioned. I mean, you're essentially describing the gateway into Industry 4.0. And this is like no doubt will cause major changes. In fact, by 2030, it will displace many of existing job functions and so on, and will replace them with completely new ones and so on. This will impact the world of design as well, the profession and all that, and the type of skills that people need to have in a world which is dominated by technology. And in fact, I think that it's quite interesting because the more the technology starts dominating the world, the more need for soft skills emerges. The need for people who can understand what does it mean to be human comes to the forefront. And designers, being human-centric, are kind of like really well positioned to help define this new world. Because when everything technologically is possible, it's no longer a question of can we do this? It's a question of why do we need to do this and for whom. And this is, I think, it's interesting conversation. And this was already like happening, like slowly happening. But now I think that the pandemic has just fast-tracked the whole thing. Yeah. And I think that has just skyrocketed us into this digital world sooner than we were prepared to.
Yeah.
So, it's like the reason why, like, for example, why I thought that you will be such a great person to be talking on the topic of new normal is precisely because what you explained in the beginning, like how you were looking at the world, even when you started your career, but even how you continue looking at the world. And now, I mean, the very notion of new normal just implies that we kind of are coming to grip with the reality of things, that we just accept that the world is no longer going to be the same. But it's not an easy thing. It's very hard to just detach yourself and embrace this whole new change. Yeah. And this is why I really wanted to kind of understand what does new normal mean to you right now, because you have that ability to see the world in this way.
Well, of course it's difficult because we are, as human beings, social animals. I mean, at the end of the day, you could argue the only reason we exist on this planet is for each other. So, I mean, if we don't have each other, what do we have? So, and that goes back to issues of relationships, love, family, all these things. So the difficult, obviously, part right now is a lack of, let's be honest, the kind of lack of physical contact, right? That's really what's going on in a way. But let's just go back a second, because I know there's a lot of students listening in and some professionals, et cetera. I want to talk about originality for a second. The reason I mention the word originality is because I've grappled with this for many, many years in my life. When I was a little child, I was a bit of a nonconformist, and I was ridiculed constantly as a child and all that. I always felt like the odd child, and I was always finding I had to somehow gain some sort of respect. I was the best drawer, let's say. I was, one of the top in mathematics. I was like pushing as a child to prove to my peers that I have. How can I say, I have some value or meaning or something. But, at that time, I noticed that education was all, and it is still, this idea of the lowest common denominator, pushing us, making us all the same. And from a very young age, when you're pushed to be the same, especially in the formative years, this stuff sticks with you for the rest of your life. So, when my daughter was in pre-K, for example, I went to pick her up, a little boy would walk up to me, he was 4 years old, and say, why do you paint your nails? Well, they're not painted now. Why do you paint your nails? And my reaction to that little child always is, why not? First of all, but when I walk away, I think to myself, he'll go back, tell his family, his father or mother, or probably his father, would say that's ridiculous. Why would a man paint their nails? Also, and there's this ongoing, even in 2020, this ongoing perverse, desirous need to be like everybody else, to fit in. It's like as if human beings are phenomenally insecure, But when you think about the creatives, which, by the way, historically, creative people were always exiled, right? They were executed, they were thrown. This notion of being creative was almost non-permitted generally in many times in history. But those people that are trying to break out, there's 1 out of 1,000 who are left-handed, let's say, or whatever they were always sort of put under a phenomenal amount of pressure and suppress their kind of real existence. But what the creative part was something inside you, in your soul, telling you, I am on this earth with a different fingerprint than everybody else. I am here to create something. And I have said this for many years. To be is to create, meaning that we are all given the genes to create. And if you look at the progress of humanity at 2020, that we have a plane made out of 70% polymer, which is phenomenal, or we have the internet as an example, or on a microchip, and we can go on and on and on. This is all creation. We've created all this. In other words, first of all, the whole world is designed, period. It's not that there are certain people who are designers and not, etc. We shape the future and we evolve and progress humanity. That's what design does. So with the combination of two precepts here, one is that we shape the future of humanity means that we have to work in the moment because we're shaping the future. If I tomorrow design a building, that building may be around for 50 years. So I'm shaping human experiences for the next 50 years. And I have to be sensitive and cautious and how can I say, responsible. Likewise, if I design a physical object, maybe that object, I just last year did a mobile phone, it only lasted on the market a year because that's that business. It's just moving so fast. Or I design a chair, it may last 50 years. But these things are around us, shape our mental psyche for the better or for the worse. Right? They give us a better life or just become obstacles and deterrents and problems in our lives. And so with all that said, this notion of that you want to tomorrow create, right? It means that you are capable of some sort of creation that's original. And how to be original? Because, if you put up your fingerprint again, the repeat is 1 out of 8 billion, right? Oh, the iris is 1 out of 12 billion, the repeat. If you want to do something that no one else has done, it's very simple in a way. You have to be sensitive to the moment in which you live. So we're living in a very strange new world right now, right? It's almost, relatively void of human contact. At the same time, we are living in an age that's incredibly virtual, very digital. We're living in no question in the information age. We are living also in the image-driven age because a lot of people are reading far less and just looking at images, swiping up, down, and we're taking in. And by the way, I read that there's something like, what is it? A day, 2.5 billion images generated. A day. Is that crazy, right? It's absurd, actually, when you really think about it. So, and you might contribute 20 of those images today to that cloud of the 2.5 billion images, right? So this is an interesting age. At the same time, interestingly enough, in technology, wow, there's amazing things going on in technology right now. In the material world, material technology, there's so many people rigorously and so many entrepreneurs and companies developing completely biodegradable, beautiful polymers, because we live in the plastic age. We will continue to. We can't get rid of plastic. We need plastic. Plastic is everywhere. So how do we deal with it responsibly? At the same time, there's every other day, and this is in my office, we were literally every week seeing some sort of new material. So there's materials. Then the software, the way the softwares are moving, is affording us to imagine anything that our mind can imagine, right? And we can render and do the most beautiful, hyper-realistic things that we never could have done before in the past. I was brought up with, analog rendering with markers, and I was good at it, right? I was like really good at it. Now I'm terrible at modeling because I don't spend enough time on it in 3D. But there's stuff, you see stuff out there, and you so many people, when I even put images on Instagram or my staff do it, they say, oh, is that a rendering? It's actually sometimes really a photo. So we've also blurred this notion of reality and irreality too, right? So there's so many things to be inspired by. And if you look in the history of design, let's say, Charles Eames, the potato chip famous chair, the reason it's iconic is not because of the form and Herman Miller. It's because it was the first time plywood was bent in 3D in Michigan by Herman Miller. That's what made it, how can I say, pivotal in the world of design. It made a big shift. It's an icon. Another icon, Alvar Aalto, first chair that was done in 2D bent plywood. Mark Stamm and Marcel Brauer, first chair ever to bend a steel tube because they saw a bicycle factory in Dresden that was bending steel tube. And they said, hey, maybe we could make a chair. And after 17 prototypes later, they managed to get a chair that we now know, so famous, this movement of a chair, and so many copies and replicas and et cetera. So all of these objects that made an impact, the ghost chair of Cartel, first time of a polycarbonate molded, injection molded chair, not PP or not another material, of a polycarbonate. Hence, it became iconic. So you, as a designer, in any field, be it branding, graphics, fashion, anything, you need to kind of find within you something original. And if you just can't find it within you, you have the greatest opportunity with thousands of inspirations out there to allow you to do something new.
Well, this is it's a very interesting discussion, and I think where things are moving and where the shift is going to take place, especially if you kind of follow this line, is generative design technology.
Yeah.
And this is going to change things radically. We worked with Autodesk. We have a very close relationship with Autodesk, and they're kind of like the leaders in generative design technology. We were actually very fortunate to have access to this technology probably a year before anyone in industry had access to, because we sometimes, kind of play around with these things and see does it make sense, does it not? So I had this kind of a same idea, and I was at the time in conversations with Magis. I think you did something with them as well. And I visited them in Venice. We met in New York as well, and so on. And I said, hey guys, let's kind of design together the first generative design chair. Let's kind of use the software and see what the artificial intelligence is gonna come up with. Now, the artificial intelligence doesn't actually design the chair. It generates hundreds of thousands of solutions. And it's very interesting how the role of the designer actually changes. So the designer, designer moves away from this exploratory process, which is like endless sketching, to come up to a certain shape. The computer does that, and the designer all of a sudden moves from a creator to a curator. So you're curating the machine, right, designing, except the machine can generate hundreds of thousands of solutions in a matter of seconds, which is humanly impossible. But what you do is you give parameters, and you can say this material, this kind of dimensions approximately, I need to kind of have, I want it to cost this much, or I want to be manufactured in this particular way, and you kind of get that. And it was difficult for them to understand because they really believe in this, we kind of do this, we need people to craft stuff. So they didn't went for it. And then later, a year later, or whatever, Philip Stark did that with Cartel. And I was also with Autodesk, and I was so disappointed again at that, because it was I also believe we need to embrace, and you need to be the first, and you need to kind of.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter if you're the first or not. I mean, don't think that originality and being first are necessarily completely symbiotic. What I mean.
No, it's not in that way. It's more about, just kind of living in the moment, and you have that right now. It's not just about being first. But
if you have this, the possibilities of this, you should have 30 students do exactly that right now. And you should show an AI whole spectrum of 30 different chairs and 30 different students, all generated by AI. And what I like about the process is, at the end of the day, the chair happened to look a lot like Philip Stark, because the chairs that were inputted in the first place were Starks, you see? So there's a lot of ways of looking at the problem in a way, because you still have some creative input that way, but outside of just being an editor. But I always say that as designers, in a way you could argue we're editors of social change, and we're editors of culture, and we're cultural shapers. And we're the ones who move this world, and we create the movements that become the trends, that become the kind of social milieu of the time, always, you know. So, you know, a nice example of that is there was a high-tech movement in the late 70s that some designers were pushing, and in lofts they were using industrial refrigerators and stoves and things. Now, 30, 40 years later, the status quo is to have stainless steel refrigerators, stoves, et cetera. You know, people were living in lofts back in the late 60s and 70s as squatters, right? Artists in Soho and Tribeca and in the south part of London, and basically not paying rent and living in high ceiling, you know, exposed sprinkler, exposed ductwork lofts. Today, you pay a premium for this. You know, this stuff becomes generic and becomes trend. But anyway, with all that said, let's talk about something. Here we are in this kind of virtual age, and maybe this is an opportunity to finally make the world more create more choice and more disparateness between things. Because the problem with the digital age has become, and I'm always an advocate of technology, but I will say the world is shrinking, and there's becoming a kind of singular culture, and that singular culture is completely appropriated constantly. So, you know, I'll give an example. In 1979, Jean-Paul Goude, who's a fantastic artist and photographer, French, he married Grace Jones. You know, so if anybody out there knows who Grace Jones is, he did these beautiful photo essay of 5 nightclubs in the 5 boroughs of New York, and the photos were huge on the wall, and it was 5 dancers kind of in a position movement of the kind of dance they do and their clothing. And there was Bronx, right? You can imagine this, you know, and there was Staten Island, and there was there was Queens, there was Manhattan. And those 5 photographs, if you look at them online, everybody was completely dressed differently. The dance was different. And what you don't hear in the photo, obviously, is the music was different. Okay. Now, today, you know, except for the last 6 months, I was flying 200 days a year. You know, I was in cities around the world. And what do I see? I hear the same music. I see the same furniture. I see the same interiors. I see the same glass kind of skyscrapers. I see the same people drinking the same cocktails. I see the same, basically what I'm seeing is a world that's shrinking to the point of perpetual Me Tooism. Perpetual. That's it. You go, what happened? Is there, you know, someone said the other day, an art critic said, is there even an avant-garde anymore? Is there an avant-garde? So the perversity is, on one hand, we have all this amazing tools and software that are basically democratic. I mean, this stuff is so free for everybody. We can do anything. There's tens of thousands of musicians, more musicians today than ever before in history, more designers and artists than ever before in history, more of the creative profession. This is the creative epoch. Everybody decides now they're going to be creative, right? Which we are all capable of, which is fantastic. So on one hand, humanity's gone in the right direction. We were all capable of creativity at one time. It was suppressed. Now we're becoming freer and freer and freer to be self-expressive, to find ourselves, to be different, to be creative. And the paradox is that's not happening.
Yeah, there was the same complaint about the architecture as well. You know, what you mentioned about the McDonaldization of cities, how they were always referred like this over the last 20 years, you know, this kind of like star architects just replicating, you know, buildings, you know, city across city around the world. And it's like cities trying to be unique end up being completely the opposite.
Right. You don't know. Yes, it's true. Like a city sits there, all the thinkers of the mayor and everybody in the city goes, let's see, how are we going to attract tourism? Let's see, what should we do? Oh, we'll hire this, you know? Yeah. Paris did this, we'll do it. You know, Bilbao, Spain did it, we'll do it. You know, it is ridiculous. Even to the point where now it's like, you know, all of a sudden there's like large letters of each city, like to be photographed against, like, you know, because everything's got to be about a kind of Instagram background right now, right? So there's this, again, perpetual following. And, you know, it frustrates me, but I will say, and I think this is deep down my greatest inspiration. The things that frustrate me, the things that I dislike, the things that don't work around me, makes me want to do better, makes me want to fix them, makes me want to do something different.
That's inherently inside every designer. And this is like a common thread that you take any designer, you unpack, and you find that within them. I always find it very interesting. It's like that need to constantly change the world and improve it. And even on the smallest level, like you said, it's share, and you say like, I can do better than this. I don't think it's quite comfortable, or I don't think it's quite this. I can do better. And it's this core belief that designers have, which is essentially about making the world a better place, from the smallest to the biggest. It's very interesting that you mentioned
that social agenda. They have to believe in it, though, because I don't think a lot of designers actually are that socially inclined. Meaning, I think a lot of times in their mind, they're playing games or tricks or doing something that they think is expressive. And this is, by the way, the other school that opened the doors for doing a lot of bad work out there was, and I hate to criticize it, but I'll be the only person in the world to criticize it, was Droog design. Droog design of the Dutch movement basically gave this notion that, design is about a one-liner. So you go and you go, oh, that's nice, Campari bottles making a lamp. Oh, that's nice, rope that becomes a chair. It's kind of like, and you could argue that it bordered on kitsch.
It's a gimmick, it's a gimmick.
Yeah, okay. So a lot of designers, because I'm sent work every day, nonstop, on every social platform possible, and I am shocked at the majority of it that's very superficial. It's not very smart, not pushing anything, not deep, not thinking even about how this stuff is physically built. This is another problem with the virtual world a little bit. And it's more about a one-liner. It's more like, aha, I see, I get it. But if design is a social agenda, then you go out there and you say, so I don't know. I go to a place like in America, we have the Container Store, right? You go to a Container Store and the whole thing is about organization, which is fantastic, right? At the same time, there's so much more we can do in organization. So there's a great opportunity there because, I always say that designers are really to clean up the world. We're here to organize and clean it up because it's just such a mess. So there's an opportunity to design some great products for that world. Or, and I'll give you a very, very small example. The other day, I'm looking for something to charge all my phones and laptops. The stuff on the market is atrocious. Nobody's done something really, really clean, good, works well, etc. What I'm saying is the same with design in general. Design, and in fact, the virus now has really, I think, made a opportunity to understand something that we should have always worried about in the past. And one thing I found that kind of to inspire me from all this is, I noticed that, let's say, bacteria and virus and dirt and all these things were very ill considered in design for a very long time. I remember about 8 years ago in Milan there, I went to a party for Abbott Laminati, who are pretty innovative when it comes to plastic, the laminate surfaces. And they had a laminate surface that you could eat on. And they served dinner for 100 people where they put the food right on the table. Because you couldn't scratch it. It was completely hygienic. It was basically bacteria-free, blah, blah, blah. Fantastic. And you know what they were using it for? They developed it originally for laboratories. And now, you can have your dining table like that. So then you look around your physical space and look at the furniture people have. A good example is, back in the 90s, I was designing in Japan for a furniture company, using aerospace fabrics. And aerospace fabrics they had were so amazing that they were comfortable, felt good on the couch. But if you poured a glass of wine, it sat there like a puddle. And you just wipe it. Right? So today, 98, maybe 99% of our furniture still has traditional bad materials that don't last, that are not hygienic, that are not easy to clean, that stain, etc. Floors, we use wood floors in apartments. Wood floors are terrible, by the way. They catch in all the grooves, all kinds of really viruses and bacteria and everything. And they scratch very, very easily. And once they scratch, what do you got to do? You got to redo your entire wood floors. We're living in a lot of very old ideas of materialism, of construction, and everything. So here's opportunity. Think about now making a house, designing an interior of a home, making garments, making furniture that's really smart and intelligent. No crevices where dirt can get trapped. Design something that could be clean just like that.
Yeah, we actually we do those things. We have a very we have two like major centers that we started in the school. One is a future mobility center. The other one is a fashion technology center. And we kind of mix and overlap both.
Yep.
We explore a lot with new materials, new fabrics. So things that you mentioned, like the technology that we have here, it's like ultrasonic welding for fabrics.
Exactly.
It's incredible. You know, it's like how you can kind of sew things without sewing, and there are no seams, and they use them for medical kind of things. You know, because it doesn't.
So that's the kind of that's the focus. I think for the future, to shape things, to do new original things, is to use these kind of technologies.
Yeah.
It's great opportunities.
So like the type of things, and we've been exploring this type of things exactly as you said, even before the pandemic. So especially for interiors for cars, for vehicles. As we're moving more to shared economy, autonomous vehicles, and all of these type of things, you know, there is a more need for, it will be less and less ownership of cars, more and more kind of like a shared type of service vehicles. So one of the first things that we kind of like flagged to our industry partners, we worked with all the major companies in Detroit and so on, and many others. And what we flagged was, again, the hygiene issues and all these type of things. And it was very interesting because it was not really covered in the auto industry at all as an issue. And there was nobody really actively working on that either. So we called our friend from Procter & Gamble, who just happened to be here in the same city as us, because they're specialists in cleaning, in cleanliness. They're the ones who have, like, you know, all the scientists in the world who develop cleaning products. And we feel like, can we explore kind of this new world, which is the inside world of the interiors? And we combine that with, because I have a textile scientist on my team as well, so she looked at all these other type of fabrics and stuff like nano-coated fabrics, self-cleaning fabrics, integrating, you know, different type of sensors into all these things, just how to ensure that you're constantly bacteria-free, constantly clean, you know, every time. And which is funny because now that's going to become probably one of the most important things moving on. And it's going to set like a new standard pretty much for all kinds of things, especially in the public domain, where this is where I see, for example, like a great new opportunity for the field of design, you know, just kind of reimagine many of these things. So
yeah.
Like,
yeah.
What do you think about, you know, on that front, kind of like, have you started thinking about some of those type of things?
Well, I always thought about them. And I tell you why I always thought about them is out of, again, kind of personal frustration, you know. When I see all these mistakes in the world, I always want to make them better. So, you know, a good example is the way we construct homes, you know, at least in America in general. The construction is made up of so many different materials, and then we have all these bad kind of relationships that if we're not building precisely, then things are not perfect, right? So what do? I mean, this is the advent of why we created baseboards. We have a wall, we have a floor, and that seam is not perfectly straight. So we put a baseboard there to hide it. So now we go from floor, then we have a step, and then we have a baseboard, then we have the drywall and all stuff. And I always, and for many of my interiors, I guess now for probably 25 years, I've always tried to make the floor and the wall kind of one, unified.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also very inspired from back in the day with people like Luigi Colani and others who were developing, and I was brought up, I remember as a child, we had a bathroom that was entirely one-piece fiberglass. And I remember a bright yellow, beautiful bathroom with a shower and the toilet and the sink were all one. I remember all soft. And I remember when my mother used to clean it, she basically hooked a hose up to the tap and sprayed everything, the whole. And we had one drain in the center. Now, that kind of smart living, I think we're going to move to now. See, I think because we've been told, we realize that our sort of arguably bad habits need to change, and we can, as designers, physically address the physical ones. Maybe not the human social ones, but definitely how the physical ones, how we interact with the physical ones. We design, basically there's a plethora, too much stuff in the world, firstly, right? So as a designer, you are an editor. You want to get rid of it. I always say that a good designer, if they put one thing on the market, they should take away three, right? A kind of, addition by subtraction, let's call it, So if I add to the world, I kind of subtract from the world because the world.
I like that, actually. It's a really good way of, kind of.
Yeah, the world can't. The world can't take on anymore. We can't keep producing and producing and producing. We know this now, too. I mean, this is the other social shift that's happening in the world. Look at retail as being dying in many industries. It was dying before the virus, and as you even mentioned, that this was almost the eye of the storm. That boom, now retail is really dead, right? All of a sudden, you walk along Madison Avenue here in New York and Fifth Avenue, it's like every other shop as they've left. They're not even like waiting this out, and now they're opening and they can open. We've heard about the bankruptcies of Neiman Marcus, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're probably starting to consume less. It'll be very interesting to see at the end of 2020 what the kind of, let's say, consumption was in America. Per capita, the dollars that were spent on consumption, and we're going to consume less but better. That's an old, I think maybe Dieter Ram said that or somebody, but less is better. But we're going to move to that because we're learning something now. We're learning that we can live with less. This dematerialization is very good for humanity. And you know what? It's the only way we're going to survive. And I'm a big believer that none of this is an accident or a coincidence. It's all part of a master plan. The master plan here is that globally, we need to stop behaving and being hyper-productive and, how can I say, hyper-consumptive anymore. We got to slow down. We all got to pull back. We got to be more resourceful. We got to be smarter, and we have to let the earth survive. 20 years ago, when the digital age was really starting to happen, I had a theory that the digital age came about so the world would survive, humans would survive. And because industrial revolution in 180 years has just destroyed this world. We made a really toxic environment, incredibly toxic environment. Just to give you an example, 1910, 1 out of 500 people in the state of New York got cancer. Today, it's 1 of 3. So where is all this coming from, right? So we've really got to pull back, and it doesn't mean that we regress and we go back to like living off the land and not having technologies. No, we use our new technologies and we be intelligent and we start creating a world that's sustainable, that's ecological, that's smart, that affords us to have great human experiences with just a lot less.
Yeah. No, and this is like, it's very interesting that you mentioned this. Actually, at the moment, I'm working with a smart farming startup, AgTech, and this is absolutely the future. Like where things like this is like an incredible new territory for designers and for so on, and for technology companies to explore, because there is so much waste, unproductive waste being created currently by the way the agricultural practices are done, yet the world keeps growing and growing and more people need to be fed. So we are kind of currently developing, it's an incredible technology being developed today, how to do huge amount with very, very little of the resources that we are kind of currently using.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's the most important thing is moving forward, I think, for everyone.
And what's interesting, you mentioned that, is that I also have a theory that it's, this is the epoch of the entrepreneur, right? So, thanks to Kickstarter and Indiegogo and everything else, any of us that have a good idea that's relevant, let's say, to the world, right, can make it happen today. And this is why the world is changing quite quickly overnight, because there was a time historically that very few people, be they inventors or have ideas, could ever really do anything. The world was dominated by some big corps, and basically that was it. And the majority of us were like working 9 to 6 and killing ourselves. Today, you have a good, smart idea that's relevant, that people need. And let me just say that. I think it's really important that there's a need. for it. You put it on the market, and there's a good chance you're going to be very, very successful. So a lot of people are thinking in this way, being really sensitive. I visited a factory in Israel where they are growing leather in the laboratory.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of the leather that they're growing is if you pick up the two pieces of leather, you can't tell the difference of the real cow and the one that's done in the lab. The beauty is, first of all, there's no seams, so you don't have to like cut around and waste a lot when you skin cows. Number two is you don't have to skin cows because a huge part of the industry, a lot of the cows aren't even consumed. They're just being used for the leather.
Actually,
there's more and more of this happening, and I think all over the world globally, there's so much of this going on that we are all, it's like, not the majority of us, but there's a small group of us that are really pushing to end up making this world become a utopia, really.
Yeah. What about the leather, because I was always kind of like really, I was thinking like, oh my God, is this like an issue? Like, how do we move away? And we're looking at all these type of things, like to grow leather from fungi, from this, from that, and so on. So as it happened on the university where I am, we do have a leather research lab. And I went and I talked to them. And I was actually surprised to learn, because I was kind of going with the others like, well, maybe this is all bad what you're doing. But they actually told me that essentially the leather is kind of like a byproduct from food waste, and if they don't use it in this way, it will just go on a landfill. So that was kind of like an interesting thing, something that actually I have not considered. So it's like, it made me wonder in terms of like, are we doing worse by trying to create this new type of imitation leather while the actual leather is going to go on a landfill? Or, it's just like, again, this kind of, idea about are we doing better or worse?
Sure. But this notion of like growing in a laboratory, the beauty about all of this is it's manufacturing on demand, which has been in discussion for 30 years, but it's now possible.
Yeah.
We don't really need to make anything until someone buys it, And which means then you don't have all this warehousing, tons of inventory, tons of commodity that goes nowhere, that ends up in landfills, tons of waste. Clothing eventually should be made on demand. All this should be produced on demand. And once we have that in place, the amount of less consumption of energy will be a phenomena,
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was kind of having a conversation with Amazon about, the future of retail and some of these type of things that we talked about, which is currently now happening, and with all these orders online. And the way that I saw things was, again, minimizing all this waste and reimagining the future of retail. So the way that I was seeing, like in terms of like retail may not be like a place where you go to buy the clothes, actually, the physical space, but maybe they have like a nice big 3D scanner where you go in and they have like samples of fabrics and materials. So you're scanned, so that kind of becomes your kind of like a digital, like a print. And then you choose type of materials and so on. And then whenever you want to order a piece of clothes, it comes just based just for you, rather than kind of having these random things. Because currently, the biggest thing.
There's a lot of startups working on this now. I was approached in the last 5 years by 3 different startups to do this. No one's put it out there yet. In 1999, I was doing a flagship shop for Giorgio Armani. And the first interior I got, I was very surprised he even gave me one because I was an industrial designer. And I flew to Milan. He flew me to Milan. He sat with me and he said, I need to reinvent myself for the 20th century. He said, and you're the guy to do it for me. And I was very like, wow, that's great, right? So I proposed to him one shop in Soho, one in Tokyo, one in Paris. Each one had a different idea. But the one in New York was a runway, right? And basically these models that are unemployed anyway, or don't have work, they would walk around all day in the store modeling on the runway. And when you walk in, there's a huge flat screen and a body scanner. This is in 1999, by the way. And the reason is because I was at SIGGRAPH in New Orleans and I saw the body scanners there. They showed them. And at that time they were maybe 250,000 each. They were like crazy money. And it was the beginning of the idea. So I said, you put a body scanner in, you walk in, you scan, and then we're going to have digital touch screens where you can try on 30 years of Giorgio Armani archives on you. Because in SIGGRAPH, they put me into the movie Saturday Night Fever and changed me to John Travolta on screen. There were all these people standing around watching. It was hilarious. And I was so impressed with that, right? I said, oh, we'll use this in the store. So there were no clothes in the store at all, right? You could try on everything. And then you got like a gold card and you would go home and log in and then you could buy what you want, see your body on your screen, move it around, try clothes on. That was 1999, by the way.
It's very forward-thinking, though.
It hasn't happened yet, you know?
People are working on it. And currently the fashion industry and the technology behind it is very focused on this personalized type of things, like a ready to wear by pushing a button.
Yeah.
And it will happen because companies are losing a lot of money when you order something online, you try it on, and you return it because it doesn't fit you. They're losing a huge amount of money. So this is why this will happen, you know. And we're getting there.
Yeah.
We already have this technology, 3D body scanners and stuff. It's far more affordable right now.
Right.
But like the new piece of equipment also that we are just waiting to arrive, we ordered it from a startup 2 years ago, which they're making them one by one. It takes a long time. It's a 3D knitting machine called the Knitterator. So it will knit in 3D a piece.
Yeah, beautiful.
From sneakers, from this, from whatever you want. And if you compare those things with like a, you know, software, which we have another software that kind of does this type of body scanning, that's it. Like you get immediately what you want, what you need, and it fits you perfectly, and it's just for you.
You know, you've mentioned so much of that school. I have to come down.
You have to come. It's we have absolutely incredible stuff.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. Let me just add to what you were saying about all this is that, you know, there's a subject called variance, and it grew out of the opportunity that we could actually have software and write algorithms to actually make change. We opened our conversation with this, right, about the AI chair. You know, and back in the day, I was very impressed with Gaetano Pesce. You know who he is? Gaetano Pesce. Okay, so Gaetano.
Oh yes, yeah.
Did a lot of experiments in Italy over the years and in New York, where he was basically trying to make non-serialized production. So he had workers, for example, he'd make a mold, and he'd have all these cans of resin above, the different colors, and the workers would pull strings and fill the mold with colors of their own choice. And because the paint would actually come and change, every chair, every table that came out was completely different, but it was still an assembly line of sorts. Then he made a wood box where he took polyurethane and he had a shape of a chair inside, but when he injected the polyurethane in, it didn't quite reach all the surfaces. So every chair that came out looked like the Stone Age, were completely different shape. I was so inspired. He was my professor back in early 80s. I was so inspired by this notion of non-serialization. But when I finally got a chance to try to do some things with it, we already had CNC. So I worked with a machine down in Santa Fe, New Mexico for a company called Nambe, where I designed maybe 30, 40 vases for them over about 3-4 year period in an alloy. And I saw these beautiful multi-turret machines, 7-arm machine that could do everything, drill, bore, you know, polish, a huge machine, right? They were about $1 million a piece. And I said to them, you guys should invest in one of these machines because they were sandcasting. And I said, sandcasting is so dangerous and labor intensive. We take a piece of alloy, put it on the machine, and then we can cut any shape we want, right? So they loved this idea. They actually invested in a machine. They opened up a little factory for it. We were making a lot of designs, salt, pepper shakers, creamers, all kinds of things. And then one day I thought, you know what, I need to find someone who could write a software program that the machine will randomly cut its own vase. So we did it. And the machine cut 30 vases one day, right, in a period of about 2 hours. And every one we took out and we put them in a row and looked at them all. And they were all completely different forms, completely by 0 and 1, by binary notation. The machine cut weird vases. And I love this because it was like now, again, it's like you talked about at the beginning. I now was the editor. I looked at the 30 and we put
curator.
We put one in production, but I tried to convince them that we go to production with this notion that when you buy it, you see a vase on the shelf and there's a bunch of boxes there, but the vase you see is not the vase you'll get.
Yeah, actually, I remember that. Now that you mentioned this project, I remember this project that you did. It was I think one of the confusion with the people was when they're buying it and it's not what they actually seen.
It got so disappointed. It happened. So guess what? You know who bought was Bloomingdale's, right? So I went to Bloomingdale's and I sat there signing some objects and all that. And a woman saw the vase there. And she picked up the box. She opened the box and she got so disappointed. And I tried to explain the process. And the problem was that we had to educate people about that idea. And it was such a disaster. It was such a bomb, you know?
It's a very interesting thing that you say, but it's actually, if you kind of twist it around, it's all about setting up the right expectations with the people.
Yes.
First of all,
but today you could do it.
You can. And I personally think that if you come with the right mind, and it's kind of like, almost like unpacking a present, you know, like you don't know what you're getting, but it's exciting, you know, and then that kind of surprise factor kind of adds to it because it's just like, it's unique. And nobody else going to have that as well, which I think that adds further to the value.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what's interesting about it? Even though they were unique, they cost the price of sameness. Meaning if the vase was $60, the one that stayed the same, it was the same price. So that was the interesting thing because it was a time for uniqueness where you always paid luxury or premium. It's like that notion of limited edition, all those myths of the idea that you should pay more for something that's unique. Today, you can produce uniqueness that's as democratic as any mass-produced product.
It reminds me of this like creativity exercise. A friend of mine was doing this workshop on creativity with restaurant owners. And it's a very fascinating because like it just tells you how people have this like a set framework, which is very difficult for them to step away. And he tells them like, okay, tell me like 10 things that a restaurant must have no matter what. And then they say like, okay, well, tables, chair, kitchen, menu, knives, cutlery, you know, like whatever, you know. And he says, okay, now take away one of these items and tell me how you're going to run a restaurant. And they're like, oh, impossible. Like you absolutely need to have these things. It's like, but why? It's like, okay, let's take away the menu. Let's say no menu in a restaurant. It's like, it's impossible. How will people know what to order? So like, why do you think this is an issue?
Yeah.
When people come to your home as guests for dinner, do you give them a menu?
Yeah.
It's like, no.
No.
Are they upset with the food that you brought them? No. Are they enjoying the experience? Yeah.
There you go. There's another quote or interesting change that took place with the coronavirus. I went to a couple of cafes here in New York just recently because, you know, they're all on the street. They're all open on the street. I don't know in Cincinnati what it's like.
It is open.
Yeah, but you can go inside or not? You can eat it?
Yeah, we wear masks.
But inside you can eat. So right now you still can't inside. So and what they do is they basically have a barcode on the table and you trace the barcode and the menu's on your phone. Now, that proposal, I honestly, in the last 10 years, in about 20 restaurants that I've designed, I tried to make that happen. And no restaurant owner was the least bit interested in making a menu virtual on your phone. That it's going to be a given. And what's interesting, more and more, you notice we're touching less.
Yeah.
And we'll need less, and we don't need paper. We don't need to use paper. That's a whole other discussion. But we know that the amount of tonnage of trees chopped per day to provide us paper that's waste, most of it, is wrong. We're moving again. That's part of that disastrous condition we created with the Industrial Revolution. So that's another great thing. There's so many great things that are actually going to come out of this in the sense of the silver lining of the coronavirus.
Yeah, Karim.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Hopefully next time we'll do it, 6 feet across from each other.
I hope so.
Physically.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well,
everybody out there, stay healthy, stay intelligent. Right?
Yes.